Landlords in one state feel like they're being forced to raise the rent because their property values increased and the county increased their taxes. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. All right, so I have an interesting article for you today, and it's coming out of South Bend, Indiana. Now, this isn't the type of place I normally talk about, but it really is reflecting what landlords are feeling all across the country, and that's that our property taxes are increasing a lot, okay? County governments, they're trying to continue to fund the operations of their counties, and they're saying, hey, we need to raise the taxes. The unfortunate fact is that as landlords, we bear the brunt of these property tax increases, okay? So obviously I own 4 properties in one county and I have to pay a lot more property taxes than somebody who has one house, okay? So every time the property taxes increase, I have to consider whether I need to increase the rents on my properties or not. And that is the same thing that these landlords are talking about right here. They feel like they're being forced to raise the rent. Yeah, you're going to be forced to raise the rent when inflation pushes property taxes higher. When, bloated government, bloated city government who isn't making good use of their funds, they think, hey, the solution to this is raising taxes. We're going to keep raising taxes. No, it's not the solution. That is a failed solution because you end up in a place where, hey, the property values are being held down because people can't make the payments due to the property taxes being so high. This is something that you see in a lot of cities where you see, the property values, they don't look that high, but then the property taxes are super high. I've read that here in Nebraska, for example, we have some of the highest property taxes in the entire country, which is hard to believe because we're not a big state, okay? We're not a New York. We're not supporting super old infrastructure or anything, but for some reason, the property taxes here are super high. And the only thing I can think of is the road maintenance due to the bad weather and road maintenance in hugely rural areas. So they have to keep the property taxes relatively high just to keep the roads in good shape, That's the only thing I can think of. I mean, honestly, I just don't get it. I used to live in Kansas City, and Missouri, as you know, isn't that far away from Nebraska. And the weather that they experience there is very similar. They get, the same 4 seasons, snow, etc. Yet the property taxes in Missouri are significantly less than they are here in Nebraska. So, yeah, I just don't get it. But this is an issue that a lot of landlords are dealing with. And it goes along with all the other factors of inflation, like increased insurance costs, increased maintenance costs, increased cost of capital expenditures if you have to replace a roof, etc. Okay, so, and not to mention mortgage costs. With the interest rates so high right now, it is killing a lot of landlords. So we are in a position where, yes, we are going to have to raise the rent, and it's going to be more than a lot of tenants are going to be willing to pay. Fortunately, we're in places where the market is more free, okay? Our rents aren't regulated by the government because the government has no idea. They have no clue what each individual landlord's expenses are. None. They don't know if landlord A over here, in terms of inflation, his costs inflated 20%, but landlord B over here, his costs only inflated 6%. So they do this big blanket assumption of, landlords in general, their expenses only increased X. And I'm like, well, that doesn't mean anything because every individual landlord has different expenses. So before I get into the article, go ahead, hit the like, subscribe button, maybe leave a comment down below and let me know what you think. So to the landlords out there, how much did your property taxes increase over the last couple of years? Okay, I'm just curious. Obviously, property values are still increasing because there is a housing shortage overall throughout the entire country. And a lot of the local counties are coming by and they're reassessing the properties at their higher values because they want that tax money. So I'm just curious, how much extra are you guys paying now versus, let's say, back in 2020 before the pandemic? Anyway, let's get into this article and see what it says. This article is coming from abc57.com, and it says, landlords feel forced to raise rent amid rising property values. And let's see what the landlords up in Indiana are saying about the whole situation. Over 100 neighborhoods in St. Joseph County saw a change in property tax assessment values this year. Neighborhoods near key areas of development saw the most drastic. This includes neighborhoods surrounding the University of Notre Dame, full of rental units. Indiana does not have rent control, so landlords have the authority to increase rent. Still, local landlords say they don't necessarily want to do that to their tenants, but with property values going up, they feel forced to. And they absolutely are forced to, okay? If you don't keep your rents up to market level, you are basically hurting yourself, okay? You're hurting your business, you're hurting your future operations, because you could face increased expenses in the middle of the year, in the middle of your tenant's lease term, and then you'll be sitting there like, well, what do I do now? What do I do now? Well, you should have been collecting that extra money and then putting some extra money aside so that you would be prepared for major problems, okay? That is something that we all face as landlords. So yeah, this is something that we just have to do. We have to do it. As time passes, inflation, it always occurs. It has always occurred, yet it's slower than it is at other times, or it's faster than it is at other times. So right now it's at a very high, fast rate, okay? And we want to see it go back down to a slower rate, but it's going to take some time for that to happen. So right now we just have to face the reality of, okay, we're going to have to increase our rents. And if the people, if they you know, it is our responsibility to make sure our properties are rented. It isn't our responsibility to make sure that people remain housed, okay? If this person over here can't afford the rent, maybe another person can, okay? And I know that's unfortunate, but that is just the way the world works. So anyway, let me continue. John Brady, a South Bend realtor and landlord, explains how much things have changed in recent years. Well, we always talked about the South Bend community being very inexpensive to buy a home, he said, but that day is gone, I think. Prices just keep going through the roof. The realities of rapidly rising rent is hitting the tenants, of course, but hitting the landlords as well. We're almost forced to keep raising the rents, or some landlords won't maintain the property because they don't have the cash flow to do it, Brady said. And that's another issue right there. If you don't raise the rents, how are you supposed to maintain your property? This is the issue that landlords under rent control are facing all the time. They can't, like they're legally unable to increase their rents in order to maintain their properties. And so a lot of properties fall into disrepair. Well, the same thing can happen to a landlord if they keep their rents artificially low. They can face the same issues as a rent control landlord who also has artificially low rents. So yeah, it's not a good thing in my opinion. What we want is we want our housing stock to be high quality and everything updated, everything kept in good shape, everything well maintained. And we want our tenants to be paying the market rate. We're not trying to gouge, because simply put, gouging in terms of rents doesn't make any sense. Okay, saying, okay, we're going to charge this tenant $1,000 a month more than the market rate. Well, in a correct real estate market, nobody would pay $1,000 a month more than the market rate, because nobody would be able to afford it. Okay, or nobody would think that the quality of housing was worth way more than, like you have two identical houses next door. You have one house that's charging $2,000 a month, and then you have another house right next door charging $3,000 a month, right? Well, if the market was correct, the person charging $3,000, their house would be sitting empty. It would be sitting empty because nobody would be willing to pay $3,000 for something that's only worth $2,000, okay? But the market isn't correct, and what we have is a housing shortage. And so a lot of people are saying, okay, we're willing to pay a little bit more for this, but actually what they're doing is they're driving up the value of the available housing, okay? It's not, like the house that's $3,000, it's not that it's gouging the price, right? It's that it is actually worth more because the demand is high and the supply is low. That's how supply and demand works. So basically the market is working exactly the way it's supposed to if somebody rents the place at $3,000 a month. But you know what? I can't explain this stuff to the people in charge of rent control, because they don't see it that way. They see it as, oh, this is unfair, this isn't right. And I'm like, listen, the only way we can fix this problem is by either increasing the supply or decreasing the demand. And increasing the supply will obviously decrease the demand if we increase it enough. That's the other issue. They're like, oh, well, we're building new housing. You're not building enough. Build a lot more new housing. Like we need to see, tens of thousands of units, even in smaller towns, okay? Just to, flood the market with units. But how are we going to build that many units? We just can't anymore, because you know what? A lot of the companies that used to build tons of housing like that during the last recession, they went out of business. They went out of business because, they lost so much money, and you know what? They're not going to build like that probably ever again. Now there's so many new rules and new regulations and new hoops you got to jump through that they've made it extremely difficult to build the large scale amount of housing necessary in order to keep costs down. But you know what, a place like South Bend, Indiana, like I know the landlords there are saying, hey, this place isn't affordable like it used to be, but they're comparing it to the way it used to be instead of comparing it to other areas, okay? Compare it to other areas, and South Bend is still extremely affordable, I'm sure. Okay, I'm certain of that fact. Just like, I hear people around here in Omaha, oh man, costs are so high now. And I'm like, hey, what are we comparing it to? Are we comparing it to Omaha, 5 years ago, before the pandemic, before all the inflation and nonsense? Or are we comparing it to all the other cities around the country, okay? Like if you compare it to other major cities around the country, we are actually still one of the most affordable places in the entire place. So anyway, let me continue. Brady has been a landlord for the past decade. In an attempt to someday retire, we purchased 3 homes and we use them as rental properties, he said. As investment floods the region and property values appreciate, that cost often gets passed on to tenants. Gosh, 2019, I think I might have been at 1,000, but it's 1,300 now. And I'm going to be able to hold there for this year, but I don't know about next year, Brady said. And yeah, I can tell you what my rents were just a few years ago, back in 2019 as well. And they all are significantly more. And that's just the way it has to be. So, like, if you want to give a handout, like I said, we are not a social service provider or homeless shelter to these tenants. And as much as, like, I had a long-term tenant in one of my properties, and I wasn't raising the rent enough on her, and I finally started doing so, and you know what, she didn't complain even, because she knows that she was getting such a good deal for a long time, and I know that if she moved on, I could easily put another tenant in there for the exact same amount that I'm charging her. So, it's like, well, what do you do? What do you do? Like, I can't subsidize your rent forever. And that's what I was doing. I was making the mistake because I was like, well, she's a good tenant and, my expenses are X and I'm still making money. Well, things change. Things change. So anyway, interesting article. Let me know in the comments down below if you have had to increase rents on your properties due to property taxes increasing or your other expenses increasing as well, and how much you've had to increase those rents.